Hi everyone, and welcome to Carmel Unfiltered. I'm Samantha Fulling. This episode is a recap of the March 10th, 2026 Board of Education meeting, breaking down what was discussed, what decisions were made, and the community's take. Why am I doing this? Board meetings can be long, confusing, and sometimes downright boring. There were nights that I stuck it out for the long haul, and others I just could not sit there for another minute. However, board meetings are important. They provide insight to the inner workings of our district, give you an idea of current fears and complaints, and allow you to decide if you'll vote for that trustee next time they run. So this is my way of giving back to the district stakeholders who can't be present during meetings, don't want to review the next day, or for those who are really only interested in one or two hot topics for the night. I will state approximate timestamps for each section or topic I run through. So if you're interested in looking at the actual board meeting, you'll be able to find your topic a little bit easier. I'll also be linking the board meeting down below for your convenience, but you can easily find current board meetings on YouTube by searching Carmel CSD Board of Education. So let's get into it. All right, so the board meeting starts on their video at the 1 hour, 10 minute, 40-second mark, and that's the call to order. So Board President Melissa Orser calls the meeting to order at the Matthew Patterson Elementary School. Roll call confirms trustees present at the time were President Melissa Orser, Vice President John Curzio, Trustee Jordy Douglas, Trustee Nicholas Magliano, and Trustee Jim Wise. Trustees Torpy and Grasso are noted to be arriving later, and immediately after roll call, the board votes to enter into executive session to discuss personnel matters and collective negotiations. At the 1 hour, 42 minute, 43-second mark, the board returns from exec, and at that point, the Matthew Patterson principal, Miss Darling, introduces the fourth grade chorus, and the chorus leads us in the Pledge of Allegiance and the national anthem. And then they perform their school song. And they were absolutely adorable. They were very good. Please go back and at least watch that. They were so cute. At the 1 hour, 55-minute mark is student recognition. So the board recognized a group of, I believe, previous Matthew Patterson students. They were in fourth grade last year. They're currently in fifth grade, who had their poetry published in the Excellence 2025 Poetry Collection. Their teacher, Jacqueline Zuloff, describes how the class entered the contest together and encouraged one another to take creative risks. She was quoted telling her students, "You might not win, but you took the risk and you believed in yourself." Each student is called forward and presented with an honorary medal from the district, which were presented by Superintendent Plotkin. At the 2 hour, 6 minute, 57 mark is first public comment. Speaker number one is a resident from Stormville. He is a habitual speaker at these meetings. He brought up comments raising several concerns about district spending, budgeting, and transparency. He started by pointing out that the district often ends the year with unused funds and questions whether those funds indicate that the budget may be higher than necessary in the first place. He also raised concerns about staffing levels, noting that enrollment in the district has declined over time, while staffing numbers have increased. His argument is that the district should be adjusting staffing levels to match enrollment trends. Another topic he brought up is the cost of class coverage, and that payments made to the teachers when they cover additional classes because another teacher is absent. He suggests that those costs have become significant and deserve closer examination. He also references the universal pre-K funding shortfall, questioning how the district ended up in a position where the program is costing more than expected. Finally, he expressed frustration about how long it took the district to develop and adopt the Fraternization Policy between staff and students. His view is that the policy should have been addressed sooner, given the importance of school maintaining professional boundaries in schools. So speaker number two was actually me, and I had zero to complain about. It was all good stuff. And I brought up the staff basketball game, the battle on Fair Street between Carmel High School and George Fisher Middle School last week, which was amazing. There's so many kids there and so much extra staff in the stands cheering. These staff members get a little frisky on the court. I'm not going to name names, but there's one principal I was very shocked to see how aggressive he got with his opposing staff members. It was actually very fun to see staff and especially teachers in a more humanized, just fun-loving way. And I suggested that the district might consider organizing something similar in the future for maybe Parents First staff or Board of Education, current and past, versus administration. I think that would be fun. I think sometimes small community events like that can help build positive connections between the schools and the broader community. I also took a moment to encourage the board and the public to come support our high school students' music program and their high school musical production of Chicago, which is running, I believe, throughout the weekend. Tickets are very inexpensive. There are still some great seats left. I have tickets for Friday night, so if anyone wants to come say hi to me during that, I will be there. Our third speaker of the night was a SEPTA representative. She spoke about Developmental Disability Awareness Month and the importance of ensuring that students with disabilities and their families feel supported both inside and outside the school environment. She highlighted several programs designed to help first responders interact more safely with individuals who have developmental disabilities, including the Blue Envelope program, which allows individuals with autism or other disabilities to provide first responders with information about how they communicate and what accommodations may help during an interaction. She also brought up the Safe Me program, which will allow families to voluntarily register important information with local emergency services so that responders have context when reporting to a call. In addition to those programs, she promoted several local awareness and inclusion initiatives, including upcoming autism awareness events, educational forums, and community activities designed to promote acceptance and understanding. So at the 2-hour, 25-minute, 10-second mark, we start with board comments. Vice President Curzio asked Assistant Superintendent Ken Silver about a position referenced by a speaker, the Director of Facilities role, and Silver explains that the position is currently vacant, but that the budget line associated with it is helping offset the district's UPK funding shortfall. The board also clarified an important point about two policies that have been heavily discussed in the community, and President Melissa Orser explained that the social media policy has been under discussion for several years. The Fraternization Policy, however, is newer. According to President Orser, it originated from discussions at a school board convention in October of 2025 and was first brought to the Carmel board in December of 2025. At the 2-hour, 30-minute, 40-second mark starts the superintendent report. Plotkin discusses recent remote instruction days caused by weather and thanks families and staff for the quick adaptation. And the district is trying to balance weather closures while maintaining enough instructional days to avoid losing state aid. At the 2-hour, 34-minute, 33-second mark, there is a budget update from Assistant Superintendent of Business Ken Silver. And one of the biggest drivers of the cost increases this year is health insurance, which is projected to reach roughly $31 million. Silver outlined several strategies the district is considering to manage costs, including adjusting bus purchasing schedules, using repair reserves, and reduced debt services as older bonds expire, and potential staffing savings through attrition. At the 3-hour mark, there is some board discussion raising the idea of streamlining board meetings by removing or modifying several recurring agenda items, including committee reports and compliments and complaints. President Orser responded by explaining how those sections currently function and opens a discussion about whether the agenda could be reorganized to make meetings more efficient. The board also discussed making it easier for the public to access meeting materials through board docs and possibly using a QR code system. At the 3-hour, 10-minute, 40-second mark, the board discusses the possibility of an overnight music trip. Trustee Jordy Douglas raised the idea of a large trip, potentially something like a Disney music trip. Superintendent Plotkin expressed some concern about the liability and supervision responsibilities for an overnight trip. But one possible compromise discussed is having trips organized through booster organizations rather than the district itself. At the 3-hour, 23-minute, 21-second mark, a Six Flags physics trip was discussed. This trip would allow students to discuss physics experiments using roller coasters and other rides. Trustees debated the educational value and whether similar opportunities should exist for students who are not enrolled in physics. But the trip was ultimately approved. At the 3-hour, 31-minute, 37-second mark, Policy 9267, Social Media Use and Digital Citizenship, was discussed. Now, this policy addresses how district employees should conduct themselves on social media, particularly when identifying themselves as school employees or district employees. Most of the policy itself is fairly standard and encourages professional conduct online and reminding staff that their public posts can reflect on the district. But one specific section of the policy sparked some debate amongst trustees. The section recommends that the employees who identify themselves as district employees on social media should include a disclaimer stating that their opinions are their own and do not represent the district. Vice President Curzio raised the first concern, stating that while the idea might sound reasonable in theory, he believes it goes too far when it comes to employees' personal accounts. He argued that the district should not be telling employees what they should or shouldn't put on their private social media profiles. Curzio explained that many employees prefer to keep their personal social media completely separate from their professional roles, and some people may not want to publicly connect their accounts to their employer at all. In his view, even though the policy language says employees should include a disclaimer rather than must, it could still feel like an expectation or pressure from the district. Other trustees responded by pointing out that the language in the policy is advisory and not mandatory. They note that the wording intentionally uses the word should rather than shall or must, meaning employees are encouraged but not required to include the disclaimer. The reason behind the suggestion is that if employees publicly identify themselves as district staff, a disclaimer can help clarify that their personal opinions are not official district positions. Trustee Michael Torpy points out that similar language exists in many professional organizations and is often used simply as a best practice recommendation. However, Trustee Curzio maintains that even a recommendation could create confusion for employees about what the district expects from them. He says that if the district truly believes employees have the right to their own personal opinions online, the board should avoid language that appears to regulate personal accounts. As the discussion continued, several trustees signal that while the disclaimer language might be well-intentioned, it may not be necessary. Rather than debate how strongly the language should be worded, the board ultimately decides to remove the section of the policy entirely. With the disclaimer language removed, the remaining portion of the social media policy, which focuses on professionalism, appropriate communication, and digital citizenship, does remain intact. So at the 3-hour, 53-minute, 21-second mark, the board held the social media policy vote. And it was a roll call vote with John Curzio voting yes, Jordy Douglas voting yes, Frank Grasso voting yes, Trustee Magliano voting yes, Melissa Orser voting yes, Michael Torpy voting no, and Jim Wise voting yes. And I clarified this earlier with Michael Torpy, and he also brought this up at the board table, that he could not find any other school district that has board members mentioned in their social media policy, that it is strictly for employees and for students, not for elected board members. At the 3-hour, 54-minute, 9-second mark, Policy 9268, prohibition of fraternization between school employees and students, is discussed. So this policy is designed to establish clear boundaries between staff and students, particularly when it comes to communication outside of school hours and communication through personal devices or personal accounts. So one section of the proposed policy focuses specifically on electronic communication between staff and students. The original draft included language stating that communication between staff and students should not occur between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And the goal of the restriction is to discourage late night communication that could blur professional boundaries. That section quickly became the center of a lengthy debate. So it starts with Trustee Jordy Douglas raising some concerns. He states that as someone who works as a professional educator, he pushes back strongly on the time restriction. Douglas argued that the modern educational environment, communication outside of traditional school hours is common and often necessary, and students frequently send questions about homework, projects, or assignments in evening hours. He says that if teachers happen to see those messages when they're checking email at night or early in the morning, that they should be able to respond. Douglas was quoted saying, "As a career educator, I'm going to get home tonight and look at the emails from some parents. I don't expect a reply, but they deserve to see a reply when possible." And he emphasized that in many cases, the communication is not a conversation, but simply a quick response to a question, something like confirming whether a project can be turned in the next day. Douglas then argued that putting a strict time restriction into the policy could actually discourage helpful communications between teachers and students. Trustee Magliano points out that the real concern isn't the time of the communication, but how the communication happens. The policy already states that staff should only communicate with students through district-administered systems, such as district email or learning platforms. And Douglas agrees that communication should stay on district systems, but reiterates that the time restriction itself may not be necessary. During the discussion, one suggestion is floated that perhaps teachers could respond to a student message after hours, but not initiate one. But that idea was quickly challenged. Trustees noted that even if a student starts the conversation, it can still create a pattern of late night communication that may be inappropriate. They also reference guidance from district legal counsel and recent examples from news reports involving boundary violations in schools. Trustee Jim Wise strongly supports maintaining firm boundaries in the policy. Wise argued that while most educators act professionally, policies must be written with worst case scenarios in mind and not just ideal situations. Trustee Wise is quoted saying, "Statistics and the hard facts tell us otherwise. Our district is very large. There is no way there has not been inappropriate communication between some staff members and students. It's not a maybe, it's how much and when." Wise says he cannot think of a legitimate reason for a teacher or staff member to communicate with a student in the middle of the night, and that policies should reflect that as an expectation. During the conversation, another trustee raises a practical question: could staff simply schedule emails to send later? The board confirms that Outlook does have a scheduled send feature. President Orser notes that if a teacher writes an email at 4 a.m., they could simply schedule it to be delivered in the morning instead of sending it immediately. And that suggestion becomes one of possible compromise. Eventually, the board considers an amendment to change the time window. Instead of prohibiting communication between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., the amendment narrows the restriction from midnight through 5 a.m. Some trustees believe this is more reasonable, preventing late night communication while still allowing teachers flexibility in the evening or in the early morning. Trustee Douglas remained opposed to include any specific time restriction in the policy. Another important amendment was proposed to strengthen the original policy. Originally, the policy stated no staff member should contact any student for district purposes by any means other than district administered systems. Trustees raised concerns that the phrase "for district purposes" could create a loophole. Someone could claim that the communication wasn't for district business. For example, thanking a student for a gift or commenting on something unrelated to the school. To eliminate the ambiguity, the board votes to remove the phrase "for district purposes." So now the sentence is changed to read, "No staff member should contact a student by any means other than district administered systems." Supporters say that communication strengthens the policy by clearly limiting communication to official district channels. So before the vote, there is one final debate. Supporters of the policy say it establishes clear boundaries and strengthens protections for students. Douglas reiterates that while he agrees with the intent of protecting students, he believes that the time restriction unnecessarily limits legitimate academic communication between students and teachers. At the 4-hour, 14-minute, 18-second mark, the Fraternization Policy vote commences with a roll call vote, Curzio voting yes, Douglas voting no, Grasso voting yes, Magliano voting yes, Orser voting yes, Torpy voting yes, and Wise voting yes. Immediately after the vote, there is a heated exchange between Jim Wise and Jordy Douglas. Trustee Jim Wise starts by saying that the policy means that students are now protected from inappropriate communication. Trustee Jordy Douglas, who voted no, reacts very strongly. He says, "Shame on you for insinuating in any way, shape, or form that I do not pride myself on protecting the young men and women of this district." Wise responds, "This isn't about you, and shame on you for putting your ego in front of the protection of our students." President Orser quickly intervened and moved the conversation forward. At the 4-hour, 17-minute, 4-second mark starts old business. So the board discusses scheduling a budget work session, which needs to happen before the end of March. President Orser asked trustees to dig deep and find some time for both the budget work session and the board retreat. Ultimately, Ms. Stevens, the administrative assistant, is asked to work with the superintendent and Ken Silver to send out 3 possible dates for a work session. And then the board attempts to schedule a board retreat, but struggles to find a date when everyone can attend. The board ultimately asked Ms. Stevens to send out a list of Tuesday dates over the next 6 weeks to try to find one that works for everyone. Trustee Jim Wise then asks about improving the audio and video quality of committee meetings. He references a previous proposal from the former Superintendent McGrath to spend roughly $5,000 on upgrading AV equipment, including a camera that follows the speaker and professional microphones. Wise asked whether the board could revisit that proposal to improve public access to meetings. Wise also asked Superintendent Michael Plotkin to provide an update on the district's work implementing Aaron's Law, which requires schools to teach students how to recognize and report sexual abuse and grooming behaviors. He asked that the superintendent include that information in a future report. At the 4-hour, 27-minute, 18-second mark begins second public comment. So speaker number 1 was the same speaker number 1 from the first public comment earlier in the night. He thanked the board for clarifying the timeline of the fraternization policy, noting that he appreciates the clarification because he doesn't want to come to the microphone and present incorrect information. He then speaks about the topic of boundaries between teachers and students, particularly when it comes to communication outside of normal school hours. He says that while many educators want to be helpful and responsive, there also needs to be a clear understanding that teachers are not available around the clock. He explains that today's technology makes it easier for students to message teachers at any time, but he believes that both students and parents should recognize that teachers have lives outside of school as well, and students should never expect immediate response that late at night. He suggests the time limits discussed by the board during the policy debate, midnight to 5 in the morning, might not go far enough. He then raises concerns about rising health insurance costs, questioning whether taxpayers should continue absorbing those increases entirely. He also criticizes what he sees as a long-term pattern of rising taxes, arguing that at some point the district needs to recognize that the taxpayers have a limit. And he concludes by encouraging the board to start saying something residents rarely hear from local government. Quote, "I'm sorry, we just can't afford it anymore." Speaker number 2 is the same SEPTO representative as earlier in the night, and she focuses primarily on field trip accessibility, particularly for students with disabilities or students who are not part of certain programs or classes that offer trips. She explained that some students in the district can go several years without participating in any field trips at all, while others may have multiple opportunities depending on their courses or extracurricular activities. She points out that many trips offered at the secondary level are tied to specific classes, such as physics or specialized programs, which means students who are not enrolled in those courses may never have an opportunity to participate. She describes how parents of students with disabilities often watch other students being recognized performing in programs or participating in activities that their children may never have access to. And because of that, she says opportunities like field trips can feel especially important. She was quoted saying, "When it comes to field trips, it feels like they're owed a little piece of something their peers get." She also briefly mentions other topics raised earlier in the meeting, including the proposed music trip and newly adopted fraternization policy, saying that she appreciates the board addressing those issues, but believes policies like fraternization policy will continue evolving over time. She then shares information about several upcoming community events connected to autism awareness and disability support, encouraging the district and community members to participate and continue building awareness and inclusion. At the 4-hour, 41-minute, 28-second mark is final board comments. Trustee Douglas speaks briefly and addresses the tension that had surfaced earlier in the meeting during the debate over the fraternization policy, Douglas acknowledges that board members do not always agree on policy decisions, but he emphasizes that disagreement should not prevent them from continuing to work together productively. He says that while trustees may have different opinions and perspectives, they all ultimately share the same responsibility to serve the district and its students. Douglas expressed appreciation for the other board members and stresses that maintaining the ability to collaborate even after difficult debates is important to a functioning board. Vice President John Curzio returns to one of the major themes of the evening, taxes and the district budget. Curzio responds in part to comments made earlier during public comment regarding the tax cap and the district's budgeting plan. He reflects on the history of the district's tax levy increases and noting that in the mid-2000s, the Carmel Central School District experienced a tax levy increase of more than 50% over 5 years. Curzio says the New York State tax cap ultimately helped rein in those kinds of increases and provided some protection for residents. He makes it clear that he does not believe the district should automatically raise taxes simply because it's allowed to under the tax cap. Even though the district's allowable increase for the coming year is roughly 1.24%, Curzio says that doesn't mean the board should automatically use that full amount. He then says he would prefer to continue examining options that might limit or even reduce the tax burden if possible. Curzio also references an earlier suggestion from Trustee Wise about potentially reducing the tax levy and says he would be interested in exploring how such a reduction might affect things like state aid formulas, including foundation aid or building aid. He reiterates that throughout his time on the board, he has consistently opposed what he considers unnecessary tax increases, even when the position was unpopular. And with that, he also notes that he was the only Carmel school board member to ever have removal proceedings initiated against him, which he says occurred because of his opposition to tax increases. At the 4-hour, 45-minute, 44-second mark, the meeting is adjourned. So that wraps up today's meeting recap. These decisions shape our school, our kids, and our community. Staying informed isn't optional. If this breakdown helped you, share it with someone who wants to understand what's really happening. For full episodes, updates, and ways to connect, visit linktree/Carmel Unfiltered. And if you have any questions, concerns, or topics you'd like covered in a future recap, message or email me at carmelunfiltered@gmail.com. I'm Samantha Fulling. This is Carmel Unfiltered, my platform and my perspective. Until next time.